Trial of Alex Murdaugh. State of South Carolina v. Richard Alexander Murdaugh was an American criminal case in the 14th Circuit of the South Carolina Circuit Court concerning the murders of Murdaugh's wife, Maggie Murdaugh, and their 22-year-old son, Paul Murdaugh, in June 2021. The trial began on January 25, 2023, with instructions from the judge and opening statements from the prosecution and defense. Closing arguments began on March 1 and ended on March 2. The jury reached a guilty verdict on all 4 counts after approximately 3 hours of deliberation. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Murder trial in South Carolina. Local media have called the trial South Carolina's trial of the century and arguably one of the most high-profile and sensational cases in South Carolina legal history. Background: on June 7, 2021, Alex Murdaugh, member of the locally prominent Murdaugh family, called police from his cell phone at 10:06 p.m., saying he had discovered the bodies of his 52-year-old wife Maggie and their 22-year-old son Paul near the dog kennels at the family's hunting lodge in Islanton, South Carolina. Both had been shot multiple times and with different weapons. Murdaugh reported that at the time of the killings around 9 it was later determined he had been with his mother, who has dementia. In October 2021, it was revealed that South Carolina Law Enforcement Division (SLED) had regarded Alex as a person of interest in the homicides since the start of the investigation. The investigation has been heavily criticized. Police reportedly failed to collect DNA evidence, and the crime scene was spoiled due to rainfall that occurred in the area after the murders. Police also allowed family members and friends to walk through the scene. Indictment and arrest. Alex Murdaugh was arrested in July 2022 after the Colleton County Grand Jury issued an indictment charging him with 2 counts of murder and 2 counts of possession of a weapon during the commission of a violent crime in the deaths of his wife Maggie and of his son Paul. The indictment stated that Alex shot his wife with a rifle and his son with a shotgun. Sources close to the investigation said that cell phone footage placed Murdaugh at the scene when his wife and son were shot. Prosecutors suggested Murdaugh was motivated by a desire to garner sympathy in the wake of financial issues that were beginning to go public. Murdaugh pleaded not guilty, while state prosecutors said they would seek life imprisonment without the possibility of parole rather than a death penalty. Trial. The trial was held at the Colleton County Courthouse in Walterboro, South Carolina. The trial began January 25, 2023, at the Colleton County Courthouse in Walterboro, South Carolina, with instructions from the judge and opening statements from the prosecution and defense. Alex Murdaugh was represented by Dick Harpootlian and Jim Griffin. The cases were overseen by Clifton Newman, who is the nephew of the late civil rights leader I.D. Quincy Newman. Creighton Waters, chief prosecutor for the state grand jury, led the prosecuting team against Murdaugh. John Meters, a Columbia attorney with extensive experience in murder trials, was hired by the Attorney General of South Carolina as part of the prosecuting team. Witnesses for the defense and prosecution were expected to number in the hundreds. Defense counsel argued that the prosecution should be prohibited from asking questions related to Murdaugh's financial crimes, but the judge overruled their objections and announced he would make a formal ruling on the matter on Thursday, February 2, 2023. The judge dismissed the jury early on Thursday, February 2, in order for the prosecution to present 2 witnesses that testified about Murdaugh's financial crimes in an in-camera hearing. The judge said that he needed to hear more testimony before making a ruling on whether these witnesses would be allowed to testify to the jury. On February 7, after several days of hearing arguments without the jury present, Judge Newman ruled the testimony related to Murdaugh's alleged financial crimes was admissible. He said that jurors were entitled to consider whether Murdaugh's financial situation was a motive for the killings. Newman also said that defense counsel opened the door to testimony about the alleged financial crimes when they asked a witness to speculate about a possible motive for Murdaugh committing the killings. A bomb threat on February 8 forced the court to immediately evacuate and reconvene several hours later to resume the trial. On February 13, Judge Newman announced that 2 jurors had been dismissed and replaced with alternate jurors because they had tested positive for COVID-19. On February 24, A new charge was filed against Murdaugh for passing contraband in the courtroom. At the defense's request, the jury visited the property where the murders occurred. Closing arguments began on March 1. On March 2, Judge Newman announced he had been notified a juror had discussed the evidence presented. The juror was dismissed for improper conduct and an alternate replaced her. Attorney Creighton Waters delivered the state's closing statement and Attorney Jim Griffin delivered the defense's closing statement. Attorney John Meters delivered the state's reply and final argument. The jury was charged and began jury deliberation on March 2. The first prosecution witnesses included first responders on the scene after Murdaugh's 911 call. The prosecution asked the judge to compel a representative of Snapchat to testify about a video posted by Paul Murdaugh minutes before his death. The prosecution brought SLED witnesses to testify about firearms and ballistics, and an interview conducted with Alex Murdaugh in a car on June 21, 2021, during which Murdaugh said of his son, "It's just so bad. I did him so bad," which Waters emphasized for the jury. The defense team disputed whether the recording said "I" or "they." A credit card receipt with a $1,000 Gucci purchase circled was entered into evidence. The prosecution brought an expert witness to testify about data collected by Maggie's phone. The prosecution brought two close friends of Paul Murdaugh to testify about their interactions with the Murdaugh family and their communications with Paul moments before his death. A witness said he heard Alex's voice in a video taken by Paul minutes before the time the prosecution believes the murders took place. Prosecutors called multiple former colleagues and clients of Murdaugh to testify about the defendant's financial situation just before the murders occurred and argued the motive was stress caused by the impending discovery of Murdaugh's financial crimes. They also called a chief executive officer of a local bank to testify about the bank's discovery of theft by Murdaugh. Prosecution called expert witnesses, including a criminologist and pathologist. Prosecution called a SLED agent to testify about a timeline for the events of June 7, aggregating all of the data collected from various sources, including the phones of the victims and the defendant, car telemetry data, and cell phone tower pings. Prosecution rested their case on February. Defense counsel called their first witness immediately after the prosecution rested their case. They called the Colleton County coroner, who testified that he had only estimated the victims' body temperatures and that the reported time of death was an estimate. On February 21, the defense called the defendant's son, Buster, to the stand. The defense called several expert witnesses, including a crime scene engineer who recreated the crime scene and argued that the presumed height of the shooter was not consistent with the defendant's height. Another expert witness testified that he believed the crime scene was not handled properly by first responders. On February 23, Murdaugh took the stand to testify. Murdaugh admitted to lying to law officers and lying regarding financial crimes because of his addiction to opioids. He denied that he had killed his wife and son. Prosecution cross-examination began the same day. Murdaugh finished his testimony the following day, and Judge Newman dismissed the jury immediately after it concluded. Defense called a pathologist who believed that the state's pathologist did not correctly determine the entrance and exit wounds on Paul's body. The defense also called Tim Pambach, an expert in blood spatter analysis. Pambach has also testified in high-profile cases such as the trial of Michael Peterson. Pambach testified that he believed a shooter would have been covered in blood and gunshot residue. He also stated that he believed that the evidence was consistent with two shooters being present. The last witness the defense called was the defendant's brother, John Marvin Murdaugh. On February 27, the defense rested their case and motioned for a directed verdict, which was subsequently denied by Judge Newman. Following the defense resting their case, the prosecution indicated they would reply to the defense's case. On February 28, the prosecution began their reply case by calling witnesses. Four of the witnesses they called had already testified earlier in the trial. A police chief who had associated with Murdaugh was also called to the stand. The final witness was a crime scene expert called previously. South Carolina Attorney General Alan Wilson conducted the direct examination. The prosecution rested their reply case on February and March 2, 2023. After 3 hours of deliberation, the jury found Alex Murdaugh guilty of 2 counts of murder and 2 counts of possession of a weapon during a violent crime. As a result of the intense public interest in the case, The verdict was broadcast live across the United States on major broadcast and cable news networks. After the verdict was read, Judge Newman denied a motion from the defense for a mistrial by saying that evidence of guilt is overwhelming. He told the jurors the circumstantial evidence, direct evidence, all of the evidence pointed to one conclusion, and that's the conclusion that you all reached. Newman later added that the jury had come to a proper conclusion as they saw the law and facts. Murdaugh was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences without possibility of parole on March 3, 2023 at 10:08 a.m. EST.